Hello knitters and friends, welcome to episode 7 of the Seedling Stitch knitting podcast. My name is Athena and I am a knitter based in Vancouver, Canada. I'm also a PhD student in engineering here, and I am going to be a knitting teacher at my local yarn store called White Coast Wools. And I'm also a fledgling knitwear designer where I have posted a couple of accessory patterns on Ravelry. And this is my little corner of YouTube where I will share some of my knitting projects and talk about some knitting books I have collected. I am a big fan of Japanese knitting books and patterns, and I have knitted a lot of projects from the Japanese designs, so hopefully my little channel can be a small window for you to learn more about Eastern Asian or Japanese patterns. So this episode will be a bit special because I want to walk through all of the Fair L projects that I have knitted. And just a preview, these are all of the Fair L projects, plus there's a couple more gift projects that I have already mailed to my parents in China. I wanted to do this because recently I've been knitting this Fair L vest, and I only started knitting about 9 months ago, and I sort of have selected more and more difficult projects to build myself up to more difficult projects like this. And I know a lot of knitters are interested in Fair L knitting, but can be a little bit intimidated by all the techniques in these colors. So I want to share my experiences so that you can slowly build up yourself to more complicated projects like these. And apart from that, I also have some finished objects, some new cast-ons, and one Japanese knitting books that I haven't talked about previously in this podcast. So we are going to get started. Make sure you grab some drink or some knitting with you. And if you're new, welcome to my channel, and I'm happy to have you here. And if you're returning subscribers, I hope you will be enjoying all these projects that I'll be talking about this time. So before the main program, I have a small announcement. I will be teaching a beginner knitting class at White Coast Wools next week, June 26th, and then July the 3rd. And you may have seen me posted a couple of knitting technique reels or shorts on my Instagram or here on YouTube, and I know I posted like 8 or 10 of those shorts at a time, and this may have flooded your subscription feed, and I really apologize for that. I didn't realize until I posted them that like YouTube is more of a subscription-based platform rather than Instagram, which is more like recommendation-based. Like when I post all 10 of them, this will all pop up in your feed, and instead of like on Instagram, they won't appear all at once. So I won't do that again. I'm really sorry. And I know a lot of you are experienced knitters who aren't interested in these beginner knitting contents, and I know some of you might be interested in these, and I made some of those shorts as unlisted so that if you're interested, you can go to my homepage. I have a playlist called knitting technique shorts or something like that, and all of my short videos on the basic knitting techniques can be found there. And I will add more of them, but I won't add them as a post so that they won't flood your subscription feed in the future. And if you're interested, you can just come here in the short playlist to watch all of them. I think in the future I won't post more than one short video per week, just so that I can release contents for beginner knitters out there without disturbing all the experienced knitters. And also I'm thinking of doing some shorts for more complicated techniques as like German short rows and Italian bind-off, cast-ons, that sort of thing. So that everybody could get some contents that they're interested in. And just related with these beginner knitting contents, I have a small finished objects from my first test student, my husband. That's from him. I wanted to invite him to the podcast. He's literally just there, but he's super shy and he doesn't want to show up. So I'm just gonna bring like this sloth that represents him. And in my beginner knitting class, I have 2 sessions. The first session will be to teach this student how to do all the basic techniques like cast on and doing a stocking stitch section and alternating between knit and purl to do the seed stitch. And this is what he did for the first class. And then before the second class, I asked them to do like a larger swatch square with the same idea, and this is what he did. I think it's okay for a beginner knitter. I think the cast off might be a bit too tight, so that will be a thing that I will work on in my teaching, like to remind my students to cast off loosely for the edge. And that will be all the announcement for the beginner knitting classes. I'm super excited to be teaching. So let's start with my Farrell knitting piles. The first Farrell projects that I have ever knitted is this round yoke cardigan for this rabbit, toy rabbit that I have made. I talked about this toy rabbit and the toy sloth in my first episode. And this is my first ever Farrell project, and this cardigan is done knitting in the flat and from top down. So basically I cast on here on the collar and then doing the Farrell section, as well as doing some increases like in these carrots, and then separate for the sleeves, and then the like the main body part, and then keep knitting in the flat for the main body, and then knit in the round for the small sleeves. And I would not say this is a good Farrell project for beginner knitters or like a knitter who just want to start knitting Farrell, because this is knitted in the flat, which means I will be knitting and then purling while doing all these Farrells, and meanwhile doing some increases between these carrots. And also some of these flows are quite long, like 5, I think at most 5 stitches, and these can be harder for a beginner Farrell knitter to like control the tension. And I did mess up the tension while I was knitting. Like you can see some of the you can probably not see because this is so small, but it's like it can be super tight at some position of the collar. But the good aspect of this project is that the Farrell section is it's quite short. It's just like 7 or like 10 rows or something. So even if I mess that up, I will only be messing up 10 rows. And at that point, I haven't found a good technique to do Farrell. And what I did was just to, let's say if I'm knitting the white, I'll pick up the white yarn, I'll do a few stitches, and then for the green, I will pick up the green yarn and then do a few stitches. And all these different colors of yarns, they kind of tangle together. So that method isn't ideal. So as I progress to new Farrell projects, I try to learn a few other Farrell techniques. And by the way, this pattern or the pattern from all these animals are from this book, Knitted Animal Friends by Louise Crowther. It's a really good book on making all these cute animal toys with different outfits. So yeah, I enjoy this. And this author recently has released a new book called I don't remember, but it's also a knitted animal friends kind of book, but it's different animals. So the next Farewell projects I made is this pair of mittens with this cute cat motif. I talked about this project in my episode 1, so I won't give out too much details on these. The design is by Marika Mikuni, a Japanese designer, and unfortunately this pattern isn't available in English, and it's only available as a kit from the designer's website with her own yarn. But I looked at a photo of her finished product and sort of draw the pixel art by myself, and then figure out the stitch numbers by myself and knitted these with my grandma's yarn. And this is a pretty good project for beginner Farewell because this is knitted in the round, so all the color work will be done in the knit. You won't do any purling, so that will be a pro of this project. I would recommend anyone who wants to try Farewell start with some knitted in the round projects like a mitten or hand warmer or like those kind of scarf that's knitted in the round. I'm going to share a project like that, or hat. For hat and mitten, you will do some decreasing while knitting in the round, which won't be so hard. And also the best thing about mittens is that it's really small, especially if you are knitting with thicker yarn. This, I believe, was knitted with a DK weight yarn, so it will be quick and you will have a sense of accomplishment. Like you will be able to knit like one motif in a couple of hours, and you'll be able to see a cat in your knitted fabric, and you will feel happy. So that's a good thing for these type of projects. For this project, I actually experimented with a few different techniques, and I settled down with this Farewell technique where I hold the two color of yarn in my each hand. In my right hand, I hold the main color of yarn, and I knit with the English method, and on my left hand I hold the contrary color of yarn with the continental method. And as I change colors, I just use the different styles of knitting to change colors. And there's also a way for carrying the floats using this method. You can do that easily. And I think I learned this technique in some like TikTok video, but I know that Andrea from Fruity Knitting has had a tutorial showing this technique in one of her episodes. I'm going to put the link for that episode below in the description box. Just to summarize the technique, this is done like when you're knitting the main color, and you knit the main color below the contrary color yarn, and when you need to carry the float, you knit the main color above the contrary color yarn, and the next stitch you return to knit the main color below the contrary color yarn. It's a short description. It's better if you watch some video tutorial for that. And the advantage of that technique is that you can basically carry floats every other stitch, so all your float will just be one stitch long. For those who haven't tried Farewell technique, perhaps you don't know what float means. So when you're doing Farewelling, let's say when you are knitting a few blue stitches and then you knit a white stitch, and then while you are knitting the blue stitches, the white yarn will be carried behind, and this white yarn will just be like dangling like that, and that will be your floats. And if you don't do anything, this white yarn will just range 3 stitches long, but if you carry the floats, it means you will tuck the white yarn between those blue yarn so that the floating strand of the white in the wrong side of the fabric won't be too long. And by adopting my technique of doing the color work with both hands, I can carry the floats easily. And actually, what I tried while doing this project was to carry the floats every other stitches. So if I show you the wrong side of my fabric, you can see all the stitches are super short. They are only 1 stitch long. And I think same for this side. And an advantage of this technique is that, like, when I'm wearing, let's say if I'm wearing some rings, then those rings won't be caught by the floats, which might happen sometime. If you don't carry the floats, like if you have a float of the size of your finger, and when you're wearing an accessory, it might catch your finger. And so that's the pro of this method. But the con of this method, I would say, is that when you're carrying floats every other stitch, and that kind of shows. Like here you can see some like white dots that's showing through between the darker blue lines, and that's because of the method that I carry the floats. But I think for this project it's okay. And let's move on to the next Fair project I did was also by Malika Mikuni. It is a Fair hat. I did an adult version. This is this is the smaller version for the sloth. The adult version I decided to give to my dad, so it's on the mail somewhere, maybe on the ocean, and it's shipping towards China. I will put a photo of that finished object here, but I can only show you the smaller version. This is like a scaled down version of the adult hat using the same yarn basically. And this, I would say, is also a very good beginner-friendly project. The pattern comes from Malika Mikuni's book, Best of Miku Knits. Her brand is called Miku Knits. This book is, I think, only available in Japanese, but like for these Fair projects, you can just read their charts and schematics, and I have tutorials in my channel to teach you how to read Japanese patterns with charts and schematics. And also I put all my Japanese knitting books in my Ravelry library. I will put a link in below, so if you want to look through a list of the Japanese knitting books that I have used, you can look at my Ravelry library. This Fair project is done in the round and from top above, and I start with casting on and then knitted in the round. And although it seems like there are many colors, I think there are 3. There's like this gray color and this red color and this darker blue color, and then again there's some gray popping out. So there are only 3 colors in this project, but each time when you are knitting, you are only working among 2 colors at a time. So here this part is done with white and red, and then you go to red and blue, and then you go to blue and white. So each time only 2 colors. And I think this is sort of the idea of Fair knitting. Like the rule is that you are only knitting 2 colors at a time, and you might change the color, you might change to other groups of 2 colors as you go to form a more colorful result, but you won't knit more than 2 colors at a time for any traditional Fair knitting. And this, I would say, is a very good project for beginners because this used very thick yarn. I think they're in the original pattern. They are holding 3 strands of Jamieson's spring drift yarn together. So that's 3 times a fingering weight yarn. And for me, I used some of my grandma's Aran weight or chunky weight yarn. I don't know. And they were knitted on 5.5mm needles, so they knit up quite quickly and finished with a cute pom-pom. I quite like the idea of having a pom-pom on any winter hats. It's just cute. And it's also a good project for practicing tension. I think when you're doing farewell knitting, it's quite hard to get the tension correct. Like sometimes when you're carrying the floats, you kind of knit it too tightly so that the hat eventually will like bunch up like this. And it happened to me actually when I was knitting this project, and I had to rip back and redo a section just to get the tension correct. But with the chunky weight, you knit again quite quickly, so it won't be too frustrating to do so. That's about it for this project. And next in line is also a design by Malika Mikuni. As you can perhaps see, Malika Mikuni is very good at designing farewell projects, but she also designs like cabling and lacy projects. As she's a very versatile designer, but I don't think she publishes in English very much. But yeah, I do like her design a lot. And this is a scarf called Niigata. Niigata, I believe, is it's perhaps the designer's hometown. It's a place. It's a small town in Japan, and in this scarf, let's see how I can fit the scarf in the screen. And in this scarf, it features a lot of motifs that is inspired by like nature and animals that presents in Niigata. This scarf will be a step above from these chunky weight or Aran weight accessories. This is done in like a proper fingering weight yarn. Oh, and by the way, this pattern also comes from Malika Mikuni's book, The Best of Miku Knits, the same book as this pom-pom hat. And this project is done with a fingering weight yarn on 3mm needle, so it's like the general size for a farewell project. And this does involve some of the more complicated motifs. But the good aspect is that it's knitted in the round. You don't do any increases or decreases. You just do pure knitting while knitting in the round. And this is also a very good project for practicing tension for any beginner farewell knitters. And this is quite long. I think it took me 1 to 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks to knit up this project, but I had a lot of fun doing it because there are so many different motifs, and it was very exciting when I go to a new motif. And some of the motifs aren't the abstract type of motif like in traditional farewell. It's usually more abstract motifs. Like for this one, we have like the swallows and the pine trees and like the wave from a river or an ocean, and like the little fruits on the twig. And I also played with color. So this project I knitted with my grandma's yarn again. This like purple bluish yarn is some cashmere fingering weight yarn from my grandma's gift stash, and I have 2 balls of them which were 100 gram, and based on the pattern I will use a bit more, like I will need perhaps 120 gram of their fingering weight yarn, so it would be of a game of yarn chicken to see if I will have enough yarn for this blue purple main color. And I sort of know that I wouldn't have enough yarn even if I cut off some of the motifs, and I don't want to cut off too many motifs because they are all so much fun and I don't want to miss any. So the solution I got was to buy one ball of different color yarn, which I decided to be this green. So I will swap the color for some of the motifs with this green yarn so that I will have enough blue purple yarn for the whole project. And the motif that I swapped was this pine tree, which makes sense because this green color fits with the tree motif quite well. And also here for this like twig fruit kind of motif, and I also just decorated with some red for this fruit, and this red are also from my grandma's stash, which kind of made the final design more fun. And another thing I played with while doing this project was how I carry the floats. So as I talked in my previous two Farewell projects, I learned to carry the floats every one stitch, and it is a very good method for you to control the tension, because as you carry the float every one stitch, there's no way that your tension would be too tight. And I actually did that for the first couple of motifs. But as I also noticed that with that method, you kind of will see some like contrary color popping up. Like you will see some white dots coming up here and there. And it's not something I would like for a motif like this. I was carrying floats every one stitch until I went up to here, like this wave. Like even for this swallow, you can still see some white speckles popping up, and like the blue purple part weren't perfectly flat even if I have blocked it. So when I started knitting this motif, I tried to carry the floats less frequently, because I think at that point I was better at controlling the tension so that my knit won't bunch up together too tightly. And for here, for example, if I have seven stitches here for the blue purple, I kind of only carry float once. I think a limit for myself is that I won't have floats that is longer than 3 stitches. Like if there are 4 stitches, I would carry float in the 3rd stitch, and if there are 5 stitches of the same color, I would carry the floats in the 3rd stitch, just so that I won't have too long a float, but also I won't be carrying floats every other stitch. And I think I like this method of carrying floats, and the final fabric looks much flatter, and you won't see any wet specks for this darker part. And that's what I did for the following sections. And I'm not sure if you can see from the camera, but for example, this result is very much flat, and even this, it looks flatter, whereas here it doesn't look very flat and uniform. That's my feeling. So after playing with these different methods of carrying floats, I decided that I won't be carrying floats every other stitch, and instead I will only carry floats for the same color ranges for longer than 3 stitches. But this caused a problem because when I was carrying floats every other stitch, my knitted fabric are like wider compared to when I wasn't doing that. Like you can see, I'm lying these together, and this part is about 1 centimeter wider than the other part. But that's okay. Like when I'm wearing this scarf, nobody will see. And it's really fun to have so many motifs. I have different ways to wear this scarf to show off different motifs. And this scarf is like one of my favorite scarves when I wear in winter. Now, unfortunately, it's too hot to wear it. And the next, it's a group of mittens, but I only have one at hand now. I've knitted 3 mittens from the book, the Mitten book by Mitten, also a Japanese designer, and she has this book that is full of mitten and hand warmer patterns, and there's also one scarf pattern, I believe. And this I have talked in my first episode where I talked everything about cat I have knitted. And this is a cat hand warmer, or no, a fingerless mitten. And this was knitted in 2mm needle. I think like during the winter I just had a lot of fun knitting mittens, and I think like knitting these small accessories can give you some practice on the tension for farrell knitting, as well as they are quick to knit and they are very good gift knits. So I would recommend doing some farrell knitting for mittens to bump up your farrell knitting skills. I have knitted this one and put some photos here. I have knitted another 2 designs from the book. The original design is a tree motif with like mitten shapes, but my mom and my dad asked me to knit a fingerless mitten for them, so I changed up some of the designs so that they become fingerless mitten. So I just do without the decreasing part, which is actually easier. Like if you want to try out some farrell knitting technique with mittens and you don't want to do any decrease, then fingerless mitten would be a really great type of accessory for you to knit. And these farrell mittens are also good projects for you to practice carrying floats while maintaining tension. Like all these designs, they have sort of long floats. I think for this one it doesn't, but for the tree motif there are floats like 7 to 9 stitches long, and I would like carry, like for 9 stitches long I would carry floats twice in between, and for 7 stitches I perhaps will only carry 1 time in the middle. So after these farrell projects I got a bit more confident, and I wanted to design my own farrell projects. And here it comes a list of my own farrell designs. The first is this one. It's called Huli Mittens, and the patterns are on Ravelry. And these are knitted with many colors, but like any traditional farrell projects, you only knit 2 colors at a time. And these are also knitted with 4mm needles in DK weight yarn, so these are a rather quick knit. And I designed this project with many colors because previously for the other farrell projects I didn't had to change color very often, but for this design I kind of change color every 2 to 4 rows. And this is also a like traditional farrell design element where you change you swap the 2 colors every couple, or like every 4 rows or something. and then you will have to change the color of yarn, which will give you a problem of how to weave in the end. And for me, I found a method to weave in the end as I go. So like as you can see here, these are the wrong side of the fabric. You won't see a lot of ends because whenever I'm changing to the new color, so like 7 stitches before I had to add in the new color, I will put in the new color. I will hold the new color as if they are a secondary color, and then I will hold the old color and I will knit the old color as well as carrying the floats for the new color. I just keep carrying floats every other stitch for these 7 stitches. So after these 7 stitches, these new color of yarn will be weaved in. I will show a bit more of that with another work in progress. So basically with this technique, I don't have to weave in all the tails after I finish the projects because I hate that. Like with these many colors, you will have, I don't know, 20 ends if you don't weave them previously. Then like weaving 20 yarn tips will just be too boring. So for me, I think it's a good idea to weave in the end as you go. And you can also search the term like Farrell weave in ends as I go, because I believe there are a few good tutorial videos on that. And these are gift knits for my friends, but she hasn't came to Vancouver yet, and I'm going to gift these to her when she visits. And there are some more Farrell designing. These are a cherry blossom caul. I call that Yinghua. It's the Chinese for cherry blossom. These are, I believe, very beginner friendly as well. As you can see, these are almost chunky. I think these are Aran weight. I forgot which needle I used. Maybe 5.5? No, maybe 4mm needle. Anyway, you can find all those information in Ravelry. And there are only 2 colors, this pink and the blue. And I have another Farrell design, which are these seedling socks, and the Farrell section only exists here in these little seedlings. And you can find the pattern on Ravelry as well. I'll put them in the link. And the takeaway from designing these Farrells are like first how to do the Farrell charting, and the app that I found was Knitting Charts, available in iPhone and iPad. I talked more about how to use that app in my episode 3, so I won't dive too deep in that. And the other thing I wanted to learn by doing this design is how Farrell works. Like, I know technically how to do Farrell, so after that I'm not satisfied, then I want to learn why it works, like why some Farrell motifs had to be like that. And one thing I found from doing Farrell is that you can use smaller motifs to break up your bigger motifs. Like these are bigger flowers, bigger cherry flowers, and then I added in these small petals to break the long floats. Like if I don't add this small design, like small petal design, then there will be floats of like 5 to 9 stitches long, and that won't be very fun. So that's one design element. And also I did the same thing for these seedlings. I have the big seedling, and then I use these small seedling to break up some longer floats, and also it adds some rhythm into the motifs. So that's something I learned by doing these designs. And finally, the capstone project, which I haven't finished, is this Farrell vest designed by Yoko Hatta, also a Japanese designer. She also goes by her studio name called Kaze Kobo, which literally translates to wind studio. and this design comes from this Farrell knitting book by her, and it's a book with a lot of Farrell design sweater and vest, and the pattern that I'm knitting is this one. So this design is a traditional full-on Farrell garment, and it is knitted with the Jamieson's Spindrift yarn, which is also like the most famous yarn for doing any Farrell projects, and this project also involves some sticking, and I haven't knitted there yet. It is a vest knitted from bottom up, and I think I am like 10 rows away to the part where I have to do some decreases and increases, and then for leaving some stitches for the sticking. Sticking, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a technique where you cut your knitted Farrell fabric. Like when I'm going to knit the collar and the armhole, there will be like there will need to be an armhole and the collar. But for Farrell knitting, it's easier to knit in the round so that you only knit, you don't have to purl. And you can do that with this sticking technique where you keep knitting in the round, and after you finish, you will cut for the armhole and cut for the collar hole, and then do something with it. So like the sticking refers to the step where you cut your knitted Farrell fabric. And to do that, you have to use some rustic woolen yarn so that the knitted fabric will still be able to hold up even if you cut it. Like this technique won't work for cotton yarn, like very slippery yarn. Otherwise, if you cut, everything will just unwrap, and that's not what you want to happen. And I would say that this Jamieson's Spindrift yarn is an absolute joy to work with. It's very airy and it's very rustic. Like when I'm knitting, all these yarns blend together. They like bite with each other perfectly. Even like when I'm knitting, sometimes I slip a few stitches, and these slip stitches will maintain the shape with these loops so that I can pick them up easily. Unlike some other yarns, sometimes if you slip a few stitches, they will unwrap naturally. So it's very easy to work with for Farrell projects. So like if you have access to this yarn and you want to try some Farrell projects, I would highly recommend you get this Jamieson's Spindrift yarn. And they have so many colors. I believe they have like 300 or something, or even thousands. They have so many different shades, and you can use the different colors to create some fun Farrell projects. For this Farrell vest, there are a few different motifs. It kicks off with this star-shaped motif, and then this zigzag, and then this like Tetris-ish motif, and then there is a bigger motif. And unfortunately, I knitted this wrong. So a correct one would look like this. So you can see this is like an X and an O, like an O and an X and O and an X. And this XO kind of motif is like a traditional Farrell design element. But here you can see this, I used the wrong color of yarn. This is purple, whereas I should use something like yellow gray-ish. It's because it's the fault of the pattern, or it's my own fault, because the symbol it used for this yellow gray yarn is it's like a purple dot but with a gray circle around the purple dot, whereas this purple yarn, the symbol is just the purple dot. And I didn't realize these were two different symbols, so I just thought it was the purple yarn. And also I hadn't known that I had this yellow gray yarn. So the other day I was just looking at bags of Jamieson's yarn I had, and I thought they gave me an extra ball of this gray yarn which was used for the main color. But then I noticed that they gave me a different yarn, which is this one. Do you see the difference? Like there is a small shade of yellow here. And then I was wondering why they gave me this, and then I looked back at the pattern that this is actually the color that's required for that XOXO motif. And so yeah, it's very hard to see. And when I made this mistake, I was already like knitted to here, and I didn't really want to rip back to this location. So I don't know. So I have two options. One option is that I just totally ignore this mistake because this is a hand knitted item, and it might be lovely to maintain the error that I made, and it's not that bad to have this purple here. And another option will be to embroider the correct color of yarn on top of this. I don't know if that will make the final fabric look uneven. I don't know if there are more experienced knitter there, tell me what you think. Should I embroider the gray yellow yarn on top of this purple, or just leave it as is? Or anyway, I can decide when I finish knitting the whole garment, like see how bothered I am about this purple. Another thing I wanted to show you is how I carry the flows and how I weave in the end. So I'm going to show you the wrong side of the fabric. So here are the wrong side of the fabric. You can see my floats are like no more than 3 stitches long. From the original design, like usually the floats aren't too long. Usually the floats are 3 stitches at most. There's only like in this XO part of the motif where some of the floats are 5 to 7, no, I think at most 5 stitches long. So I will carry the floats in the middle stitch. And another thing I wanted to show you is how I weave in the ends. So this part was where I weave in the ends. And I'll give you a close up. So basically, whenever I add in the new color, I leave about 7 stitches, and I will like carry the new color as if I'm carrying the floats. And after that 7 stitches, these new color of yarn will be secured, and then as I'm knitting with the new color, I will carry the old color of yarn as if I'm carrying the floats, and then the old color of yarn will be like tucked in, and then I will cut the old color yarn and start with knitting and start with knitting with the new color. And I believe after I wash and block the whole thing, these little ends will blend in with the fabric perfectly, so that I don't have to take any extra effort to weave in the ends. I think that just saved me a lot of trouble. The next step for me will be to learn the stick, and all the techniques are shown in this book. I haven't learned them yet, but I think it will be fine. I will be able to learn it. I'm actually a big fan of learning techniques from books instead of like from videos, because I find normally with reading a book you can control the rhythm of your learning. Like if you didn't figure out something, then you can just look at this picture for as long as you want until you learned what it meant, whereas in a video, like you sort of have to keep up the pace with the teacher, and sometimes you have to see some section for many times, and you need to scroll front and back, you have to pause, and I think it just makes the learning process harder. I'm very excited to learn about sticking, and I think I'll be sharing about that in the next month or so. I think I knitted quite quickly on this. I think I've only worked on these for 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm almost knitting to the armhole part. So that is all the farewell projects that I have knitted. And after that, it will just be my regular knitting podcast contents about my current updates and some knitting books. And the first is a finished object, which are some I-cord bracelets. This is for my husband, this is for me. And I'm making these I-cord bracelets because in last week it was Dragon Boat Festival. It's a festival in China, sort of to celebrate summer and tradition. And one of the tradition we have, apart from eating a rice dumpling thing called 粽子, is to make a 5-color bracelet. And I saw one of my friends was making it, and then it inspired me to make it, and I just learned how to do an I-cord. I think it would be a perfect method to make some bracelet. Use some color changing yarn. This is some color changing yarn from my grandma, and these are knitted with 2 like self-patterning socks yarn, and I made for myself. And I learned to do the I-cord from this book, Let's Knit in English by Tomoko Nishimura, and her Instagram is called Tate Knits. And she is an author that specialized in introducing English pattern to the Japanese knitters. And this book is all about how Japanese knitters can use English patterns. And I bought this book because I want to reverse engineer as a primarily English knitter how I can use Japanese patterns. This is the Chinese translation for this book, and it's even better because it introduced all the technical terms in Japanese, in English, and in Chinese. And the best part of this book is they have a glossary as their appendix, showing you all the terminologies, like the English, the Japanese, and the Chinese terminology, and all the symbol for some of the methods. And as some of you know, that I have been compiling a Google spreadsheet of different terminologies and Japanese knitting symbols translations, and I used part of this book to find some of the translations of some symbols. So this book has been very handy. This book is constructed as so. They have some chapters, and in each chapter it's introduced to some topics of differences between Japanese knitting and English knitting. And with each chapter it introduced some patterns, and then they have some pattern, and they have all these patterns in English, and the textual pattern in English, as well as Chinese translation, and like a Japanese symbol chart and Japanese schematics. So I think it's a very good book if you want to learn about the differences between English knitting and Japanese knitting. But unfortunately, like the article part aren't really translated in English, so you might not be able to read that. It has a chapter about I-cord. I think according to this book, I-cord is a technique that is more popular in among English knitters, whereas it's kind of new for Japanese knitters. That's why it introduced the book, and it introduced this this cord for glasses knitted in the I-cord, and I sort of adapted this idea to knit my bracelets. And it also tells me that I-cord, the I stands for idiot, meaning that even an idiot can learn how to knit an I-cord. I don't know if that's true. I just thought it's called I-cord because the shape is like the letter I. It's like a long line, like the letter I of the I-cord. I don't know. Do you know if I chord means idiot? Can make it kind of chord, or it just means it looks like the shape of letter I. And in one chapter, it talked about an interesting topic of the feeling of using Japanese pattern and the feeling of using English pattern. It says it's like when you are using the navigation map apps, like in Google Map, for an English pattern, it feels like you are just following all the navigation instructions. Like it will tell you go 500 meters and then turn left, and then when you see the next ramp you turn right, and you just follow each instruction without thinking anything about the whole picture. You just follow each step until you arrive at your destination. Whereas for Japanese knitting, it's more like you just have a map in your hand and you say, I want to go from here to here, and then you can think by yourself how you can arrive from point A to point B. I think this analogy is quite fitting. It does describe the feeling of Japanese knitting and English knitting quite well. Like, one, you just follow each step without thinking about the whole picture. The other is you get the whole picture and you will try to figure out about the little details in between by yourself. And I think you will be able to buy this book in Etsy. I'm not sure. I think it's a very popular book that can be bought, and I also include this in my Ravelry library if you want to check the name and author of this book. And apart from that, I have another finished objects, which are my Lin socks. And this is the second sock that I've finished, and as you can see, I knocked out 3 lines of the brown. I think this length of the toe looks good. This is my own pattern, and I call that Lin socks because this cable pattern that I designed here resembles the Chinese character Lin, which is my husband's name, and I talked more about this design in my previous episode. And now this pattern is in testing, and I will give a big shout out about my test knitters. They correct a lot of mistakes in my symbol chart as well as in my writing, and they've been very patient with me, and they select beautiful colors for their own knitting. Just a big thank you, and I believe they knitted quite quicker than my deadline, so I could perhaps release the pattern by the end of next week or even in the next couple of days, depending on how I finish the admin side of things. And if I do release the pattern, I will put the link in below, and I will give a 20% off for the first 2 weeks after release. And then I have a new cast-on, which aren't much to see. I talk about this yarn, which is a Chinese yarn from the Love Yarn or Huiguixian company. It is a China hemp and cotton blend, so it's a very interesting fiber. And I said last time that I wanted to knit the Crescendo Summer Top by Knit Pearl Girl or the Provence Top. Unfortunately, I didn't get the test knit because I think my fiber is too odd. And if I am a designer, I would pick someone who is using some common commercial yarn so that they can give the data that applies for more knitters. I totally understand, and I will be knitting the Provence Top, so I only cast it on. The Provence Top is knitted bottom up, but I probably don't have enough yarn to knit the full garment. I only have like 4 balls of the blue, and I have some white and darker blue, so to avoid doing the game of yarn chicken, I decided to do the provisional cast on and knit like just from the chest above and do the lacing section, and then I'll knit from the provisional cast-on below, and then if I don't have enough blue, I can change to white or whatever color I want, or just make it a super cropped length. We'll see. And I'm going to put this into the top of my queue and put my Farewell vest on the wrist, because I want to wear this in the summer, whereas for the Farewell vest, the deadline for the other is by November when I'm doing the defense for my PhD, so I will have plenty of time to finish that one. So that will be all the knitting contents that I have. I have some random chats. It has been a tradition of this podcast that I will play a piece of piano at the end of each episode. And previously I have only been playing pieces from classical composers because I wanted to avoid any copyright issue. So last week I have went to 2 concerts from living musicians. They are my favorite musicians. I went to Oliver Arnold's concert on Wednesday, and Oliver is an Icelandic ambient or piano instrumental kind of music composer. He's one of my all-time favorite contemporary composers. If you like quiet or slightly electronic kind of music, definitely check out Oliver. And I think today I'm going to play a piece by Oliver Arnold. I have his music sheets, so I guess I will be able to play. And the song I'm going to play today is called The Woven Song. I think it's a very fitting theme for knitting podcast. If there will be copyright issue, I will take down this video and upload another version with regular classical music. So depending on what music you hear, you will know. The other concert I went to was by Jan Tiersen, and he is a French composer. He is famous for soundtrack for the French film the Amelie's Fabulous Life, La Vie d'Amélie Fabuleux. I will type this here. But this concert is for one of his newer album, which is more electronic focused, and it was great as well. But there's no piano music involved in this in his concert, so I won't be playing his music this time. And that will be all the contents for this episode. If you enjoyed my knitting projects and my knitting tips, you can consider support me on Ko-fi. You can buy me a coffee or become a monthly member just to support me so that I can keep bringing these knitting contents with you. And you can also buy my knitting patterns in Ko-fi or Ravelry as well. I'm on Ravelry as Athena Liu, and I'm on Instagram as st_Athena, so that if you want to chat, you can drop me a line there. And in 2 weeks, I will be teaching my first knitting classes at Wet Coast Wools. I'm not sure if I will have time for recording, and if not, I will try to record a small my Japanese mini lesson, and hope to see you there. Or until then, see you next time. Bye!